What happens when your own family erases you from their perfect life, steals everything you built, and expects you to fix their mess when it all falls apart? Last month, my sister screamed that I'd ruined their lives, and my parents nodded like it was gospel truth. I walked out with nothing but my camera bag. This morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls. They need me now. What changed? Well, let me tell you about the receipts I've been quietly collecting for 3 years, and how sometimes the person they underestimate is the one holding all the cards. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or wondered what happens when the quiet one finally speaks up, you'll want to hear what happened next. It shocked even me. The golden hour light was streaming through the living room windows, casting everything in that warm, Instagram-perfect glow that I'd learned to capture so well. My sister Catalina was positioned perfectly on the white sectional sofa, her ring light creating that signature halo effect around her glossy hair. She was filming another lifestyle video, something about gratitude and family bonds. Remember to tag the brands I'm wearing, she called out to our mother Eleanor, who was frantically taking notes on her phone. And make sure you get the candles. In the background, the company's paying for placement. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, holding my vintage Nikon camera, the one Nana Rose had left me along with her entire photography collection. I'd been quietly documenting our family for years, building their social media presence from behind the scenes. Every staged family dinner, every perfectly lit morning routine, every heartwarming holiday post, I was the invisible architect of their online success. Dad Robert sat in his leather chair, scrolling through his tablet, occasionally nodding when Catalina asked if a particular angle made her look authentic enough. None of them had said a word to me in the past hour, but that wasn't unusual. I'd become background noise in my own home, the person who made their content magical while staying carefully cropped out of frame. Then the camera battery died. The red light blinked once, twice, and went black. Catalina's smile faltered as she realized the recording had stopped mid-sentence. Seriously? She snapped, whirling around to face me. Maya, you had one job. One job. Why can't you ever do anything right? I blinked, stunned by the venom in her voice. I can grab the spare battery from. No, forget it. You've already ruined the take. Her voice rose to that pitch that meant everyone in the house would stop what they were doing to listen. God, you're so negative. Just being around you kills my vibe. No wonder Marcus left. The mention of my ex-fiancé hit like a physical blow. Marcus had broken our engagement 6 months ago, claiming I was too consumed with family drama to focus on our relationship. What he didn't know was that the family drama was consuming me because I was the one holding it all together. I looked around the room, expecting someone to call out the cruelty. Instead, Mom stood up, smoothing her carefully styled hair. Catalina's right, Maya, she said in that calm, reasonable voice that somehow hurt worse than yelling. You've always had this ability to bring dark energy into spaces. It's like you feed off creating problems. Dad didn't look up from his tablet, but his voice carried across the room. We've discussed this before. Your attitude affects everyone. Catalina's built something really special here, and frankly, your resentment is becoming toxic. I felt that familiar flush creeping up my neck, the one that came when the ground shifted beneath me and I realized I was standing alone again. But this time, something different happened. Instead of shrinking, instead of apologizing, instead of trying to fix whatever they thought I'd broken, I did something I'd never done before. I turned around and walked away. In my childhood bedroom, now grudgingly called the guest room since Catalina had claimed the master suite for her content creation, I moved with quiet precision. I packed my camera equipment first, wrapping each lens in soft cloth like Nana Rose had taught me. Then clothes, just the basics. Nothing sentimental, nothing that would make them think I expected to come back. 15 minutes later, I was standing at the front door with my camera bag and a duffel bag, keys to my beat-up Honda Civic in my hand. The house was quiet now. Catalina had moved her setup to the kitchen for better afternoon light. I could hear her voice, bright and engaging, talking about self-care and surrounding yourself with positive energy. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I just walked out into the cool Seattle evening and got in my car. The first night, I stayed in a budget motel near the airport. The kind of place where you pay in cash and nobody asks questions. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone screen. No calls, no texts, no "where are you" or "come home," just silence. I opened Instagram and saw Catalina had already posted a beautiful image of her and our parents around the dinner table, all warm lighting and genuine smiles. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to protect your peace by distancing yourself from negative energy. Grateful for my family who understand that boundaries are healthy." There I was, erased from their narrative within hours of leaving. Not surprising, but it still stung. The next morning, I drove to a small coffee shop in Belltown and opened my laptop. I had about $800 to my name and no concrete plan, but I had something my family had never valued: skills they didn't know I possessed. I pulled up my hidden portfolio: years of photography work I'd done under a pseudonym while ghosting content for Catalina's accounts. Wedding photos for friends who couldn't afford the big names, portraits for small businesses, event coverage for local nonprofits. Work I'd done for love of the craft, not for credit or recognition. Within 3 hours, I'd reached out to 12 potential clients. By evening, I had 3 bookings for the following week: a small wedding, a corporate headshot session, and a family portrait session. My specialty, ironically enough, the apartment I found was tiny, a studio in Capitol Hill that smelled like the previous tenant's incense and had a Murphy bed that stuck halfway down. But it had good light, hardwood floors that wouldn't echo my footsteps, and a landlord who accepted first month's rent without requiring proof of family references. For the first week, I threw myself into work. I shot the wedding with the kind of care I'd always wanted to bring to family photos, capturing real moments instead of staged perfection. The couple cried when they saw the previews. "You made us look like ourselves," the bride whispered, "but better." That comment stuck with me. Making people look like themselves, but better. It was everything I'd tried to do for my family, except they'd never wanted to look like themselves. They'd wanted to look like a brand. 2 weeks into my new life, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Marcus, my ex-fiancé. "Heard you moved out. Coffee?" I almost deleted it, but something made me pause. Maybe it was loneliness, or maybe it was curiosity about what he'd heard and from whom. We met at a neutral spot, a busy cafe in Fremont where the noise would cover any awkward silences. Marcus looked exactly the same: expensive haircut, designer clothes that managed to look casual, the kind of polished appearance that photographed. Well, he'd always been perfect for Catalina's world, which should have been my first warning. "You look good," he said, settling across from me with his oat milk latte. "Different, more, I don't know, present, thanks I think." I sipped my black coffee, waiting for him to get to the point. He shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, Maya, I owe you an apology about how things ended between us. I wasn't seeing things clearly." "What changed your perspective?" "Catalina." The word came out flat, without warmth. "After you left, she reached out, said she wanted to help me understand what had really been going on in your family." My stomach clenched. "And what did she tell you?" Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I remembered well. "She showed me some things, screenshots of conversations, voice messages. Maya, I had no idea how much work you were doing for them, or how little credit you were getting." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "What kind of conversations?" He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. It was a text thread between him and Catalina, time-stamped from just after our breakup. "Catalina, I feel so bad about Maya. We've been taking advantage of her creative work for years." Marcus: "What do you mean?" Catalina: "All those beautiful posts on my Instagram, the photography, the editing, even most of the captions, that's her work. We just put my name on it. She built our whole brand and we acted like it was nothing." Marcus: "Why didn't she ever tell me?" Catalina: "You know how she is. She doesn't speak up for herself, but we should have been better." I stared at the screen, reading it twice. It was exactly the kind of conversation I'd dreamed of someone having about me: acknowledgement, recognition, accountability. Except it felt wrong coming from Catalina, like putting on clothes that didn't quite fit. "When did she send this?" I asked. 3 days after you moved out. She was really broken up about it, Maya. She wanted to reach out to you directly, but your parents thought it would be better to give you space." Something cold settled in my stomach. Catalina had never spoken up for me when it mattered. She'd never intervened when Mom called my work adequate or when Dad dismissed my contributions as just helping out. The idea that she'd suddenly developed a conscience the moment I left felt convenient, too convenient. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Marcus's revelation. So I did what I'd been trained to do by years of living in a family that rewrote history to suit their needs. I started documenting. I went through my old phone, scrolling back through years of text conversations with Catalina. I screenshotted every message where she'd claimed credit for my ideas, every casual dismissal of my contributions, every time she'd forgotten to mention my role in her success. I found voice memos I'd saved mostly by accident, including one from last Christmas, where she'd laughingly told a family friend, "Maya's like our little worker bee. She buzzes around making everything pretty, but she doesn't really understand the business side of things." Most damning of all, I found the email chain from 6 months ago when a major lifestyle brand had reached out about featuring our family's authentic dynamic in a campaign. Catalina had forwarded the initial contact to me with a message: "Can you handle the photography concepts and mood boards? Just don't mention it to mom and dad until I figure out how to position this." I'd spent weeks developing a creative treatment, shot test photos, and created a presentation that landed us them a $15,000 partnership deal. When the brand representatives came to meet with the family, Catalina presented my work as her own vision. I watched from the kitchen, making coffee and staying out of frame. Now, looking at Marcus's screenshots of her sudden guilt and recognition, I realized what was happening. Catalina wasn't having a crisis of conscience. She was managing her narrative, just like she always did. She was getting ahead of any potential fallout by framing herself as the regretful sister who'd finally seen the light. But why? What was she preparing for? The answer came 2 days later, in the form of an email that made my blood run cold. The subject line read, "Collaboration Opportunity, Authentic Family Brand Partnership." It was from the same lifestyle company we'd worked with before, but this time they weren't just interested in a single campaign. They wanted to develop a year-long partnership with our family, featuring us in everything from holiday campaigns to back-to-school promotions. The kind of deal that could turn a successful influencer into a true brand empire. But buried in the details was a requirement that made my hands shake as I read it. All family members must be available for content creation and must sign individual contracts acknowledging their ongoing participation in the brand partnership. They needed me, not just my work, but my actual presence in their content. The brands had caught on to the fact that successful family influencer accounts required actual family members, not just perfectly curated glimpses of selective relatives. Suddenly, Catalina's outreach to Marcus, her convenient crisis of conscience, her sudden appreciation for my contributions, it all made sense. They weren't missing me because they loved me. They were missing me because they needed me to close a deal. I closed the laptop and sat in my small apartment, watching the late afternoon light filter through the windows. For the first time since leaving, I felt something other than sadness or anger. I felt powerful. They'd spent years teaching me to be invisible, to work without credit, to accept scraps of acknowledgement while they built careers on my labor. But they'd also taught me everything they knew about image management, narrative control, and strategic communication. Now it was my turn to use those skills. That evening, I started a new project, not a photography portfolio or a client presentation, but a comprehensive documentation of my family's brand and my role in building it. I organized it like a legal case, which in a way, it was. A case for my own worth. I gathered original files, showing timestamps and creation dates. I compiled screenshots of conversations, saved voice messages, and documented every instance where my work had been rebranded and redistributed under Catalina's name. I even found early drafts of her website copy I'd written saved in a shared drive they'd forgotten I had access to. Most importantly, I found Nana Rose's will. My grandmother had left me more than just photography equipment. She'd left me the rights to a small photography business she'd run for 30 years, including all client relationships, vendor connections, and most crucially, the trademark to the family name for commercial photography purposes. Catalina had been using our family name as her brand identifier for 3 years, building her empire on a foundation she had no legal right to. Every contract she'd signed, every partnership agreement she'd negotiated, every product she'd endorsed using our family name technically, she'd been operating without proper authorization. I wasn't looking to destroy her. I wasn't even looking for revenge in the traditional sense. I was looking for recognition, for acknowledgement, and for the respect I'd never been given voluntarily. But mostly, I was looking for the power to choose my own terms. The next morning, I called the lifestyle brand directly, not through Catalina's management email, not through my parents' phone number, but as Maya Castellano, professional photographer and brand consultant. I understand you're interested in working with the Castellano family, I said to the marketing director who picked up the phone. I wanted to discuss some aspects of that collaboration that might interest you. Within an hour, I had a meeting scheduled for the following day, not as Catalina's assistant or family photographer, but as a potential independent contractor with extensive experience in family lifestyle branding. I spent that night preparing, but not the way I'd prepared for family meetings in the past. I wasn't trying to make myself small or palatable. I was preparing to be seen as myself, fully and completely, for the first time in years. The meeting was at their downtown offices, in a glass conference room with views of Elliott Bay. The marketing director, a sharp woman named Janet who looked like she could see through nonsense from 3 blocks away, spread my portfolio across the polished table. These are exceptional, she said, studying my wedding photos and portrait work. The emotional intelligence in these shots is remarkable. You capture intimacy without intrusion. Thank you. That's always been my approach. She looked up at me. I have to ask, when we worked with your family before, your work wasn't credited individually. Was that a deliberate choice? This was the moment I'd been preparing for. The chance to tell my story to someone who could actually do something with the information. No, I said simply. It wasn't. I walked her through everything, not with anger or bitterness, but with the same clear documentation I'd used to present any other professional case study. I showed her the original files, the timestamps, the creative development process. I explained the family dynamic without making myself a victim or them villains, just people who'd fallen into a pattern that wasn't working anymore. Janet listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just absorbing the information with the focused attention of someone who was used to making important decisions based on incomplete data. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, still looking through my portfolio. Maya, she said finally, what would you want from a partnership with us? Recognition for my actual contributions, creative control over the work I produce, and the ability to be present in the content I create, not hidden behind it. She nodded, slowly. And your family? How do you see them fitting into this? That would depend on their willingness to acknowledge the reality of our collaboration. I'm not interested in burning bridges, but I'm also not interested in being invisible anymore. Janet closed my portfolio and looked directly at me. Can you give me a week to review this information and discuss options with my team? I shook hands with her in the elevator lobby, feeling like I'd just taken the most important photograph of my life, one where I was finally in frame. The call came sooner than expected, not from Janet, but from my mother, Maya. Eleanor's voice was strained when I answered the phone 3 days later. We need to talk. Do we? Please, can you come home? Just for dinner, just to talk. I looked around my small apartment, at the photography prints I'd hung on the walls, at the life I'd been quietly building while they forgot I existed. Why now, Mom? There was a long pause. Because we made a mistake. Because we miss you. Because, her voice broke slightly, because, apparently we don't know how to do this without you. That evening, I drove back to the house I'd grown up in, carrying my camera bag and a folder of documents. Not because I was planning to move back in, but because I was planning to show up as myself fully, completely, and on my own terms. The house looked exactly the same, but something felt different as I walked up the front steps. Maybe it was me. They were waiting in the living room, Mom, Dad, and Catalina, all arranged on the white sectional like they were staging a photo shoot, which, knowing them, they probably were. Maya. Catalina stood up first, her smile bright but brittle. You look great. Independent life agrees with you. I didn't smile back, but I wasn't hostile either. I was just present. Thanks. Dad gestured to the empty chair across from them. Sit, please. We have a lot to discuss. I'll stand for now. I set my folder on the coffee table but didn't open it. I understand there's a business opportunity you need to discuss with me. The room went very quiet. They'd expected emotional Maya, guilty Maya, apologetic Maya. They weren't prepared for professional Maya. Mom cleared her throat. The lifestyle brand partnership we mentioned, they want to expand it significantly, but they're requiring all family members to be involved. I'm aware. Catalina leaned forward, her influencer voice switching on. Maya, I know things got heated before you left. I said some things I didn't mean. We all did. But we're family, and family works through things together. I nodded slowly. You're right, family should work through things together. Which is why I've been wondering why you've been representing my work as your own for the past 3 years. The silence that followed was deafening. What do you mean? Dad asked, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. I opened the folder and pulled out the first set of documents. I mean that roughly 70% of the content on Catalina's social media accounts was created by me. Photography, captions, creative concepts, even the visual brand identity. All of it documented, time-stamped, and traceable to my original files. Catalina's face went pale. Maya, that's not. I mean, we didn't collaborate. I created and you claimed credit. I wasn't angry anymore, just factual. Which would have been fine if it had been acknowledged as the family business it actually was. But instead, you built a personal brand on my unpaid labor and then convinced yourselves that I was the problem when I couldn't maintain my enthusiasm for being erased. I pulled out the second set of documents. I also discovered that the family name Catalina has been using for her brand partnerships is actually trademarked to me through Nana Rose's estate, which means every contract signed under that identifier has been unauthorized. Dad sat back heavily in his chair. Mom's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Catalina looked like she was going to be sick. What do you want? Eleanor asked quietly. I want acknowledgement. I want proper credit for my work. And I want to be treated as an equal partner in any future family business ventures, not as free labor who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve. I sat down then, across from them, holding my ground. The lifestyle brand is offering a significant partnership. I'm willing to participate, but as Maya Castellano, not as Catalina's anonymous assistant. I want my own creative control, my own recognition, and my own contract. And if we don't agree? Catalina's voice was barely above a whisper. I looked at each of them in turn. These people who had raised me, who had taught me to disappear, who had shown me exactly how much my contributions were worth to them. Then I'll continue building my own photography business, using the family name I legally own, and you can explain to the brand representatives why your key creative contributor is no longer available for collaboration. The room fell into another silence. But this one felt different, less hostile, more thoughtful. Finally, Dad spoke. We had no idea you felt this way. I tried to tell you for years, but feeling erased and being erased are two different things, and I was tired of living in the gap between them. What would partnership look like? Mom asked. If we did this together, as equals, for the first time since I'd walked in, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because someone had finally asked the right question. It would look like honesty. I said, about who creates what, who contributes what, and who deserves credit for what. It would look like shared decision-making, transparent financial arrangements, and the understanding that my presence in this family isn't conditional on my willingness to be invisible. And the legal issues? Catalina asked. The trademark thing? That's negotiable, depending on how we move forward. I'm not interested in punishing anyone. I'm interested in building something sustainable and fair. What followed was the longest conversation our family had ever had about anything real. Not the surface-level planning of content schedules or brand partnerships, but the deeper questions of value, recognition, and respect. It wasn't easy. There were tears, raised voices, and moments when I thought the whole thing might collapse into the same old patterns. But something had shifted in the room, maybe because I'd finally stopped trying to make myself small enough to fit their frame. By the end of the evening, we had the outline of an agreement, not just for the lifestyle brand partnership, but for a genuine family business where everyone's contributions would be acknowledged and compensated fairly. More importantly, we had the beginning of a different kind of relationship, one where I was seen, heard, and valued, not for my willingness to disappear, but for my talent, my perspective, and my presence. The contracts took 2 weeks to negotiate, not just with the brand, but between ourselves. We hired a mediator, someone who specialized in family business relationships, to help us work through years of buried resentment and unspoken expectations. I kept my apartment in Capitol Hill. Some boundaries, once established, need to be maintained. But I also started spending time at the family house again, not as the invisible helper, but as Maya, with her own ideas, her own creative vision, and her own voice in the conversation. The lifestyle brand campaign launched 6 months later. For the first time, my name appeared in the credits, not as assistant photographer or consultant, but as Maya Castellano, creative director and lead photographer. The photos were some of the best work I'd ever done. Not because the technical execution was flawless, but because for the first time in my life, I was photographing a version of my family that included me. In the final image of the campaign, a candid shot of all of us laughing around the dinner table. You can see my reflection in the window behind us. It's subtle, just a shadow with a camera, but it's there. Proof that the person creating the moment was also part of it. That reflection became my new logo. 6 months after that, Catalina and I launched a joint venture, a workshop series for families who wanted to improve their own visual storytelling. We called it Behind the Frame, and our first session sold out in 20 minutes, not because people wanted to meet Catalina, the influencer, but because they wanted to learn from both of us, the person who understood how to build a brand and the person who understood how to capture authentic moments within that brand. Our first student was a teenage girl whose family had been leaving her out of their social media content because she was too awkward for their aesthetic. By the end of the workshop, her parents were crying as they watched her photograph them with the same love and attention they'd never thought to show her. "You taught me to see myself in the frame," she told me as we packed up the equipment. I didn't know I was allowed to be there. Neither did I thought, but didn't say. Neither did I that night. I went home to my apartment, still small, still just mine, and developed the photos from the workshop. In one of them, a candid shot I'd taken during a break, you could see the girl looking through her camera viewfinder while her family watched her work. Her face was focused, confident, completely present. She looked like herself, but better. Just like I'd learned to do. I printed that photo and hung it next to my reflection logo, next to Nana Rose's last note, next to all the evidence of who I'd become when I finally stopped trying to disappear. The phone rang around 10 p.m. It was Marcus. I saw the campaign launch. He said without preamble, "Maya, it's incredible. You look like yourself. I am myself, finally. I know. This is probably too little too late, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for not seeing what was happening, for not supporting you when you needed it, for being part of the system that made you feel invisible." I looked around my apartment, at the life I'd built from nothing but determination and a camera bag full of dreams. "Thank you for saying that. It means something. Is there any chance? Would you be interested in getting coffee sometime? Just to talk. I'd like to know this version of you." I smiled, thinking about the girl in the workshop photo, confident and present behind her camera. I'd like that. "But Marcus, this isn't a new version of me. This is who I always was. You just couldn't see me before." After I hung up, I sat in the window of my apartment, looking out at the city lights of Seattle. Somewhere across town, my family was probably planning their next content series, and for the first time in my life, those plans included space for me to be fully present. It had taken me 28 years to learn that you don't have to earn your place in your own story. You don't have to shrink to make other people comfortable. You don't have to accept scraps of recognition when you're the one creating the feast. But sometimes, if you document the truth long enough and clearly enough, even the people who taught you to be invisible will eventually have no choice but to see you. And when they finally do see you, really see you, you'll be ready. Not because you've changed into someone else, but because you've finally grown into who you always were, the woman behind the camera, creating the moments, capturing the light, and finally, standing in the frame. Have you ever been erased by the people who should have seen you most clearly? Have you ever found the courage to step into the light and claim the recognition you deserved? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.